Hello, my name is Walter Kiefer. I'm the Interim Director at the Lunar and Planetary Institute, and I'm one of the conference chairs for this year's Lunar and Planetary Science Conference. The other conference chair is Justin Filiberto from the NASA Johnson Space Center. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss how session chairs and moderators are expected to lead oral sessions at LPSC. The role that you have agreed to take on is an important leadership role in helping maintain LPSC as an outstanding meeting. You are, in effect, the public face of the meeting because your leadership of your individual sessions is one of the things that people will look back on in terms of how they think about how this conference turned out. So I thank you for your service. LPSC is a hybrid meeting. That means that we will, in almost every session, there will be both in-person and remote presentations, often mixed up within the program. We will continue to do like we have for the last 2 years to use panel-style question and answer. What this means is that in-person presenters will be required to wear a lapel microphone. They'll speak at the podium on the stage. They will advance their own presentation slides using the clicker that's available in the session room. At the end of the speaker's presentation, he or she may return to the audience and then come back up to the stage in time for the panel Q&A session. Remote presenters will not be able to display their own slides. The slides will be presented using the same AV equipment for all of the in-person slides in the meeting room. What the presenter will do, what the speaker will do, is to ask to have the slide advance, saying next slide please, and one of the session chairs will use the clicker to advance the slide. While the speaker is giving the presentation, you will have remote voice audio, but the remote presenter's video will not be displayed. When it comes time for the question and answer, the remote speaker's audio and video both will be displayed. Let me give you a quick overview of the oral presentation schedule. The session starts with a 5-minute introduction period. It's important that you use that full time for the introductions and not start early, because that gives virtual participants time to make it into the meeting room, given the way our virtual setup is run. They need a few minutes to actually get into the room. Then you will have a set of 4 talks, 10 minutes each. It's important, again, that the speakers hold themselves to 10 minutes. In years past, if a speaker ran over on their presentation time, they were basically simply taking time away from themselves in the oral presentation, in their Q&A session. Now, since we have panel Q&A, if a speaker is allowed to run over, he or she is effectively stealing time from all of the other speakers, and that's really not acceptable. So as chairs, one of your jobs is to keep the session on time. So 4 oral presentations of 10 minutes each, and then a 20-minute period of panel Q&A for that group of 4 speakers. Repeat that 2 more times. That gets you through 3 hours, and then you have a short 5-minute closure time to wrap the session up. If it's a half session, again, you have a 5-minute introduction period where you can talk about things like your rules of the road, what the session's about, to give virtual participants a chance to get into the room. In the case of a half session, all 6 oral presentations will go 10 minutes each, and then there'll be a slightly longer 25-minute long panel Q&A before we wrap up at the end of the half session. So the various roles for the various people that are involved. The AV techs in the room will mic the presenters that are in person. They'll bring up the slides, and they will maintain the AV equipment. They will have a Zoom private chat that's available between the session chairs and the AV techs if there are technical issues. And they're the people responsible for making sure that the session room laptop that's available at the session chair's desk will be logged into Zoom webinar so that you can talk with the remote presenters. VFairs is our group that handles the remote presentation, the Zoom webinars that we use for the remote projection. They enable the auto captioning. They enable the Q&A function with upvoting. They record all sessions, which will be available for a month after the meeting. The session chairs are responsible for introducing the sessions. They introduce each presenter. They moderate the Q&A, both the people who are at microphones in the room, but also the Zoom webinar Q&A. If there are any technical issues, they would alert the AV tech for anything that needs to be worked, and they will advance the slides if there's a remote presenter. The moderators are there to kind of be a third set of hands for the chairs. They can moderate the Zoom webinar Q&A. They can communicate with the session chairs. The reason for having a third person is that sometimes one of the three people will be on the a presenter and need to be at the Q&A, and you've got to have somebody watching both the meeting room microphones and the Zoom webinar at the same time, and so we find that we need a third person up there. In-person presenters will advance their own slide in the session room. Remote presenters need to join into the Zoom webinar using an email address they will be provided with, not an email address, a URL that they'll be provided with, and they need to ask for next slide every time they need another slide for the presentation. So guidelines for how you serve effectively as a session chair or moderator. Before the session, please become familiar with presentation titles and speakers' names. This is to help you avoid mispronunciations. Understand that you will be supported. You will have both potentially in-person and remote chairs and moderators. There's going to be at least one, and we hope two, people working the session in the room, but there may be a remote chair, and you will have to coordinate amongst yourselves. Ideally, you'll coordinate in advance on what your session ground rules will be, how you plan to handle the issues that typically come up, who will advance the slides for remote presenters, who is going to introduce which speakers, and how you're going to be looking at moderating the combination of in-person and Zoom Q&A for the panel Q&A sessions. So the moderators assist the session chairs with managing of Zoom webinar. The webinar Q&A function does enable upvoting, and that is a good cue for questions that want to be asked. However, I'd like to emphasize that it's important for all presenters to be given an equal opportunity to answer questions. There is nothing more distressing to a speaker than to sit up in front and have all of the attention to go to one or two sexy talks, and then have the other attendees ignored. It really is important to give people a chance, everybody have a chance to answer questions, and so you may have to ignore a little bit of the upvoting in order to spread the questions around. This is especially important for students who are potentially being judged as Dwornik presenters. You will not know who they are, but if they're students, they are potentially Dwornik presenters, and so it's important they get questions. And in fact, any early career person, we'd say, please be paying attention to ask them questions. If you have to, you may need to work up your own questions, and you may want to think about that in advance. Again, before the session, you should have coordinated how you're going to handle time management and what you want to do to close your session off. We encourage you to arrive at the session at least 15 minutes before it starts. That means if you're in the room, be in the room 15 minutes early so you can talk to the AV techs. If you are going to be a remote chair, log in early. The AV tech will help you get connected, and you'll be able to tell who the AV tech is from the remote setup, because it will say technical support and host. If you're a moderator and you're helping in person, we ask that you bring a personal laptop or some other device with you. The reason for that is that there is each meeting room will have one laptop already there set up so that the chairs can be interacting with the Zoom, the folks that are remote, but for 3 people, you usually need more than 1 device. So we would encourage you as moderators so that you can monitor the Zoom Q&A function that you bring a device up there with you. So during the session, please welcome both the in-person and remote audiences, introduce the session chair, yourself as the session chairs and the moderator, and provide an overview of the session timeline like I went through a few minutes ago. Remind the in-person audience to silence their cell phones and any other devices, and ask them when they go to the microphones during Q&A to identify themselves with their name and affiliation. For the remote audience, remind them that they need to submit questions via the Zoom Q&A function. And again, the questions should identify themselves with name and affiliation. They'll simply have to type that into the Q&A box. So during the session, it's important when you get to Q&A that the questioning should be conducted in a civil tone and focus on the science. We don't want people to get off into the weeds of demeaning or harassing or aggressive language. That is not acceptable. Most of the time we don't see this, but it has happened occasionally. If it does happen in your session, we ask you to stop it and call it out. Usually if someone's challenged, if they're crossing the line and it's pointed out, usually it will settle down. Zoom webinar will be used for the Q&A during the session. We will have Slack sessions enabled, but they're to continue the discussion after the session's over. We will not take questions over Slack during the session. There will be a set of official LPSC ambassadors that are named by the conference in advance. They will be blogging, posting, tweeting highlights of the conference. With the encouragement of the conference. Please remind presenters at the beginning of the session and periodically during the session that it is the responsibility of each presenter, if they wish to ask, that no one share the contents of their presentation in social media. It is your right, it is the right of a presenter to ask for that, and the ambassadors are told that they should honor that. But it is something that you have to actively ask for. We will not close a session to ambassadors altogether. We do not permit photography or streaming of presentations by general attendees. Ambassadors are allowed to photograph presentations to support their media posting, but they can only do so with presenter permission. So you should remind the audience as the session's over, and maybe also at other times like at the beginning, that the sessions are being recorded and they're available for all registered attendees to watch in the virtual environment for 30 days after the end of the conference. And you might think, well, why do you want to look 30 days later? We commonly find at LPSC that people have a range of interest, and if you happen to want to be in 2 places at one time, you go to the session you want to, and you can at least see what the other session was like at some point after the meeting. Please remember as chairs that you're the ones managing the session, not the presenters. The presenters don't get to pick who's asking them questions. They don't get to rearrange the schedule. It is important that you keep the session on schedule. We do that in part to support Dwornik judges who are moving around from room to room, but also it is a great help to everyone who is session hoppers. And we have a lot of people, because of their multiple interests, that will move from room to room, and they will rely on you to keep the session on time, both not early and not late, so that they can get to where they want to go. If a presenter comes to you and says that they want to change the order of presentation, the answer is no. That you will follow the order of presentations as listed in the program, because that is necessary for everybody to know what they're going to find. If they come to you and say, but Walter told me it's okay, they're not telling you the truth. Walter's not going to tell them that it's okay. Follow the program. If there's a very rare instance where there's a good reason for changing it, the only people who can do that is either if I come to you directly or Justin Filiberto comes to you directly and says something has to be changed because of some emergency, then you can change it. Otherwise, follow the program as it's printed in the program. If it turns out that a presentation's been withdrawn or a presenter does not appear for some reason, you can't go on to the next presentation until the time that's listed in the program. But what you can do is you can have an extra discussion period of anything that has come up already in the session or any other related issues. This requires you to be a little nimble, to think on your feet. But you can use this as value added. Do not let people leave the room for a short coffee break because you won't get them back. If you have 10 minutes, by the time people leave, the next speaker is not going to have an audience. So please try and keep things going in the room by a related discussion. All oral presenters are required to submit their presentation in advance, their slides, by the deadline of March the 6th. They will be told this with multiple emails. It's not just one thing. If they ignore it, that's at their own peril. If for some reason the presenter does not submit their presentation by the deadline, a placeholder slide will be displayed by the session room AV techs. At that point, if the presenter is actually physically present, please encourage them to present without slides. It's harder to do that, but if they prepare in advance, it is possible to give at least an overview of the major points of the talk without slides. And if the presenter is willing to do that, they can at least then get people interested enough in what they're doing that they might go back and look at the recording. Well, I guess actually looking at the recording isn't going to help because it's not going to change. But anyway, I have seen presenters manage this without slides. It's possible to do it, and it's better than not having anything at all. We ask that both chairs and the moderator be actively involved in running the session. We have often mixed both early career and more senior individuals deliberately. That gives the senior individual a chance to provide a little bit of mentoring perhaps to the more junior people. But the senior person should not dominate the session. The early career people deserve their chance to learn how to do this as well. When you are presenting or when you are moderating, please do not allow one or two individuals or a small group of the community to dominate the Q&A session, whether online or in person. Everybody deserves a chance to doing that. We are all familiar with the fact that there are a few people who run to get to the front of the microphone line after every talk, and really please try and spread the wealth for the discussion time around. If for some reason there are no questions from the audience to a particular speaker, it is really important that you have prepared some kind of question for everybody, but especially true for early career and dormant candidate presentations. Occasionally there are technical difficulties. The AV techs are very good at resolving them quickly. It is still necessary to keep the presentation within the 10-minute period for the reasons I talked about before. And so that may require the speaker to be a little nimble in adjusting his slide on the fly, or his talk on the fly. If there are technical difficulties, we ask you to report them to the LPI staff at the help desk, or you can email Jamie Shambera, who is LPI's operations manager, at the email address that's shown there, and give her a report of what has happened. So during question and answer, you need to facilitate both in-person and remote questionings from the Zoom webinar. So you're going to have to kind of go back and forth. Remind everybody that they need to provide name and affiliation. The remote individuals will have to include that in the way they enter the information in the Q&A box. And this is the place where the moderators will assist the chair in monitoring and relaying questions that have come in during the webinar Q&A function. Again, I remind you that discussion should be conducted in a professional manner, focusing on the science, not on personalities. It's not acceptable to abuse the presenters in any way. If it does occur, again, I ask you to stop it immediately, and please report that information as well to the LPI staff at the help desk, or again, you may email Jamie Shambera. So after the session, if there were any technical difficulties or unprofessional behavior, make the report like we've asked. We ask for a session chair report. You'll get a link to that in your email about the session chair, about being a session chair, or you can find it on the LPSC website. We only need that from one of the session chairs, and do it at the conclusion of the session. You can't do it earlier, obviously, but do it while the information is fresh in your mind, please. It helps us planning in the future. A couple of important upcoming dates. Near the end of February, we will give you a chance to have a question session if you want to understand, if you have things you're not clear about how the your job will go. We'll give you information for how to connect to us, and we'll have a telecon where we can talk about these issues further. On the morning of your session, somewhere between March 11th and March 15th, we will ask you to come on that day at 7:30 in the morning to a session chair and moderator's breakfast. Continental breakfast is provided, and we'll go over a few final details that are important for you to know about. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't take very long, and we bribe you with food. And again, thank you. You're serving a very important function, and we genuinely appreciate what you're doing.